Hey everyone, Morgan here. So it's time to talk about Album of the Week again. And I'm going to reach really deep for an artist that you're probably not aware of, but you really should be. They're called Roxy Music. And Roxy Music is part of a genre that a lot of people would call art rock. And if there had not been Roxy Music, there would not have been bands like Duran Duran in the 80s, uh, artists like Morrissey. They all owe a lot to what Roxy Music was willing to do in the early years. Roxy's head guy was named Brian Ferry. And in the beginning, there was also another Brian in the band named Brian Eno. And Eno left after a couple of albums and gained a lot of fame as a producer more than as a musician himself. And he produced some of the most hallmark albums of all time. He was very deeply involved in taking U2 from the sound that was War, which were the angry young guys, into the Unforgettable Fire and the Joshua Tree. He was involved heavily with David Bowie. He worked with Robert Fripp from King Crimson. Okay, so really, even in Devo, he produced Devo. So in the music circle, he was a creative force to be reckoned with. Now, Roxy Music started off as a pretty pompous approach to music. I kind of like that. They were breaking rules, they were doing different sounds. And then in 1982, they released their last studio album, which is what our focus is for this week. It's called Avalon. Now, Avalon is the 10 years later grown up sound. Okay? It's not a bunch of guys that are just trying to be noticed by doing anything. These are folks who are really working hard to get just that right sound. They recorded it down in Jamaica, and it could have been Barbados. It was in the Caribbean. When they had recorded their earliest albums in London, also in the studio a lot of the time was Bob Marley, putting out amazing sounds, and they had to be influenced by this. Okay, they were willing to go in directions with instruments that other people were. I mean, they had oboe players on their albums, lots of woodwinds. Okay, Eno and his amazing synthesizer sounds. And it all got really grown up when that Avalon came out. Brian Ferry just nailed it. He wrote a good chunk of the album himself. The album leads off with a track called More Than This. And just a great late at night, going for a long drive track. Got a lot of airplay. Number one in Britain, did really well here in the United States. And then the third track was the title track, Avalon itself. A lot mellower than people were used to. And Ferry admitted he'd kind of had some influence being up in Scotland and thinking about the tales of King Arthur and things along those lines. In fact, the album cover, almost all Roxy Music album covers were one of Brian Ferry's girlfriends dressed in some provocative way. But this one, it was like a weird provocative. It was a Viking helmet with the horns coming out of it and a falcon on her arm, and you're seeing it from behind. Great album cover, really looked great. This came out when I was in high school, and I know a lot of people that were listening to this band. Okay, I went maybe about 3 years ago, maybe 2018, and saw Brian Ferry perform at the Hollywood Bowl, full orchestra with them. He did a lot of tracks from this album, but the interesting part to me was when the show was over and I started running out. I think I ran into 6 people I went to high school with. Okay, it was like, we were all listening to that same stuff back then, the progressive stuff and the art rock, and it stayed with us for a really long time. So if you've not heard of Roxy Music, now's the time. Check them out. This was their last studio album, undoubtedly their best, not their edgiest. If you need edgy, go back to some of those real early albums, and you will definitely hear some edge to them. Brian Ferry was brilliant, an amazingly well-dressed, good-looking guy. Okay, the girls in high school would swoon for him. Always just impeccably dressed in suits I could never afford, and always with some blonde model on his arm. That just seemed to be his lifestyle. Okay, thanks for tuning in, and let me know what you think of this one, because it's a really great album. Avalon by Roxy Music.